Good morning. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Well, everybody, this is Make Your Own Fun. I'm here with Raul Clement, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to be on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
No problem. So I guess I'll just start off with the basic. Are you surviving the holidays? I mean, is it a joyous time or stressful or somewhere in the middle?
Well, so I had a month off work basically, and there've been more people around than I wanted. I'm not that social,
Okay.
but other than that, it's been fine. My mom's been traveling, so she left her dog here, so that's been fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Nice dog or like needs a lot of attention or
Well, yeah, he's kind of a puppy, so I do have to walk him like 3 times a day, which is more than I would want, but it's fun having a little companion here.
No, that's cool. And where are you at now? Are you East Coast? Are you're they're visiting you or you're just watching the dog?
Yeah, I'm in North Carolina actually, and my mom is visiting my sister and her husband's family in DC.
Oh, okay.
And thankfully for my own sanity, I was able to avoid that because that's a very crowded house. It's like all these in-laws on both sides coming, and yeah, so I just spent Christmas down here by myself. So
I know
that's the way I
that
like it.
situation well more from I'm originally from Ohio, so we used to
Mhm.
have these, family gatherings and it was always so nice to see people you haven't seen for, sometimes 6 months, a year. And
Mhm.
then there, I know you've gone through this too, that thing settles in after, the meal and the kind of catching up. And there's that, I don't know, sometimes it's a 2 hour thing or a 4 hour thing that kind of just creeps in of like, get me out of here.
Yeah, just being trapped in a house with a bunch of people and nowhere to go, and you don't really have your own space because it's not your house. So, you're in a guest bedroom or something,
And you
and
feel
it's like,
obligated, right? You feel
right,
super
yeah.
obligated.
I mean, I'm okay with being rude, so
I gotta say, I see
like I'll go and surf the internet for a few hours.
just over in the corner on your
Sorry.
phone like this.
Yeah, exactly.
So I see the guitar there. I didn't know that you played. Are you just kind of a fiddler or play out locally and things like that?
Yeah, I don't play out so much anymore, but music was actually my first kind of passion and interest.
Oh wow.
So probably dating back to middle school. At that point, I was just playing in the kind of pep band sort of situation. But I had a great teacher who got me really into it, and I was playing saxophone. He was actually he worked at this middle school kind of out of love for teaching students because he also worked at Duke University. I believe he was the head of the pep band there at the time. So it's not like he needed to be working at Brogden Middle School, but he did it, and he had a way of getting everybody really interested and passionate about it. So I started like we'd have school trips, and I would deliberately not go. Like let's say that the whole school was or the whole grade was going to Atlanta or something. I would like not get my permission form signed. So I had to stay at school because I knew on those days I could go to band for every period because they didn't really care what we did because the whole school was gone.
Right.
Yeah. So, I got really into that. And then in high school, it kind of transitioned into more like rock music. Um, so I started playing with some friends. I picked up the bass just because that was sort of there's a lot of bassist story. It was the instrument that was left over basically.
Right.
Somebody had already taken the guitar, somebody had taken the drums.
So yeah, you were talking about music, and so did you transition into like open mics or playing with the band out locally, at that point?
Yeah, I was in a band and we took it pretty seriously. We recorded a couple CDs, nothing on a label. Uh, it was all like self-financed through jobs we were working or whatever. There might have been a parental loan in there or two. So,
That's
um,
great. That's great though. I mean, just the sheer love of doing it.
yeah, yeah. It's a time in my life that I look back to fondly. Um, we ended up splitting up just for various reasons. And then I kind of drifted away from music and towards writing. So that
Mhm.
was kind of part of the split up. But then lately, in the last couple years, actually, probably last 3 or 4 years, I've kind of come back to it, and especially during the pandemic. So,
I was going to ask about that if you kind of came full circle because you're kind of left only with yourself and kind of what else can I do to entertain myself besides, Zooms and
mhm.
movies and books. There's got to be some other outlet. So were you guys mainly doing originals or some covers mixed in there? A little bit of both?
Mostly originals.
Nice.
And I still like some of the stuff we did. We've had a couple reunion shows over the years. Like I think we had our 10-year and 20-year anniversary. It's crazy it's been that long,
Wow.
but yes.
My time flies.
And people were still interested enough to attend. So,
That's
I,
great.
yeah.
Have you
Um,
thought about uploading, or have you uploaded anything online from those recordings or?
yeah. If anybody wants to check that out, most of what I have on SoundCloud right now is just like new stuff that I've been doing, mostly little fragments that I put up there for my own for my own sake. But there are several of my old band, which is called Vacordia. There are several of their songs on there as well too. Um, but yeah, it's if you search Raul Clement SoundCloud, or you can search the Suffering channel is what I've got it titled right now. But I believe the link says Raul Clement, so that would take you to it too.
Oh, cool. All right. So would you say that writing outside of that was an extension of maybe songwriting or lyric writing, or was that something that you got into totally separate that eventually, you kind of just focus more on that?
Um, that's another case of a teacher, though I do think it was connected to songwriting because I felt like I was always the best lyricist in the band and the one who kind of put the most effort into that. So there was a little bit of a connection there. But in high school, I'd been going to a big public school, and then I transferred to a kind of smaller private one, which was really good. You called the teachers by their first names. It was very kind
Wow.
of personalized. Your
That is a
classes.
huge difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Riverside High School, the public one, was a 2,000 person school, and Camelot Academy, believe it or not, that was the name of it. They had called it that because they had this sort of philosophy of everyone being equal, therefore a round table, kind of. But that was 100 total people between kindergarten and 12th grade. So,
Well, were there like five people in your class?
well, we had the biggest class ever that had 17 people. And the year after us was six. So, yeah, your guess is not far off.
I'm guessing that had to be beneficial for that one-on-one student instructor ratio. So I guess, yeah, it's just kind of a peerless kind of education format. Um, so take me through that. So was it more middle school, high school? Maybe you got into poetry writing or fiction writing. Would you say it was around that time, or did it develop maybe after that?
Yeah, so that's kind of why I brought up that particular high school was I'd always been big into reading. Ever since as far back as I can remember, basically. I remember in elementary school winning winning a free book because I'd read the most books that year, right? Like we would write down every book that we'd read or whatever, and I was like far and away ahead of everybody else. Unfortunately, I don't quite read at that rate anymore. I wish I did, but
Too many distractions now, I think.
exactly, yeah. The internet's kind of ruined my attention span, to be honest. But um, but yeah, so I'd always been into reading. And when I went to this high school, I had a teacher who I'll shout out named Lynn Goodhand. And she was really great and introduced me to a lot of, interesting authors, like my first exposure to Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller and people like that. And she would, she'd even just show us cool movies like the Coen Brothers movies and things like that. Um, so she was always kind of fostering our artistic interest. And she got me sort of interested in writing. And that kind of happened to line up with what I had. It was already kind of a growing interest through a couple other sources. I had a friend who was like a really talented writer. Um, and he was probably 2 years older, so I would have been 16. He was like 18, but he'd already put on some plays and things like that, through his own school. And he kind of made the whole writing thing seem cool and romantic. And he introduced me to Paul Auster. I don't know if you've ever read him, but so I remember going to the library and finding a copy of the book Leviathan by Paul Auster, and it has a couple of writer characters, and it just made them seem really cool, and everything was mysterious, and they were having these great intellectual talks and all that. And so it was almost a conscious decision to get into writing. I'm like, that seems interesting. So I kind of took it from there, and music and writing overlapped for a few years. And then as people moved on with their lives and my band split up and all that, the writing kind of took over.
That's cool. I was just about to say, it's interesting with other people that I've talked to that it's just that teenage mentality where people find their niche or first attraction to their creative outlet through like the cult of personality, you know, because people thought, Frank Zappa looked really detached in some, archive footage they saw, and this guy cranked out like 6 albums a year, but he was just so like, whatever, it's what I do. And people were like, that's so cool. He just doesn't give a shit. That's amazing. Or, people like Lou Reed, and the writers as well, too. Just so many prolific people, going back through history that I don't know what that is for the teenage mind, but there's just something about detachment from the art where the artist makes it seem like it's meh, it's no big deal, and then the teenagers are just like, I want that.
Yeah, or just romanticizing it in some way as well, which is almost the opposite. But just these writers who live as writers, not they're not just a college professor or whatever, right? It's like
Right.
the kind of Jack Kerouacs or the Charles Bukowskis of the world that I think appeal to teenagers, um, because they've got like their whole life is wrapped up in their writing, right? And they're living on the edge of society, and you know drinking a
The
lot,
rebel, the
and
rebel
yeah,
at
exactly,
heart.
exactly,
Oh, the other
exactly.
another great example, and this appeals to I think the same bracket of young people getting interested in the arts is there's just something about doom in the sense of these people that were very young that burned so brightly, and then they died young, and then there's just some, like, again, the cult of personality, but there's just something about that particular that draws young people in where it's like, oh, I'm reading this and I get this person what they're saying or speaking through the page. Another great example is Arthur Rimbaud, which
Hmm.
that guy, if young people are watching this, he died badly, kids. It did not end well for him, but yeah, his work endures and people discover it every year and it really connects. But you're talking about that artist lifestyle of someone who lived as a poet and basically tried to live off that and selling his books when he was younger. But so take me through, how that kind of next, the next step into like maybe the college years and kind of where there's some early like successes with like publication of poems or stories, or kind of like how what you would say the next step was. in your process? Evolution, I guess.
Yeah, so I kind of wrote into a void for several years. I would um go to like a do the coffee shop thing. I'd go to a coffee shop every day with a notebook, and work on my novel, of course, which, I remember thinking it was so long, but then when I finally started typing it up, it's like I had like 30 pages, right?
Because you're
But
like
I'd done,
pouring your heart out and you're scribbling
yeah,
every day, right?
yeah, and because I'd done, I felt like I'd done like 30% of the story, and I was like 25 pages in. I'm like, oh, this is not nearly long enough. How
And the novella, maybe.
do people do this, right? So exactly. So that was a few years. Then I went to college. I went to UNC Greensboro, specifically because I had a couple friends going there mostly, and it was affordable too. My family didn't have a ton of money to be throwing at, NYU or some of these other places I got into and wanted to go to. But yeah, so I ended up doing this sort of not romantic thing and going to school an hour down the road. But there they had a great MFA fiction writing program. And of course, I was an undergrad at the time, but there were still classes for undergrads taught by some of these professors. So that was kind of the next step, I would say, was getting to take classes with people like Michael Parker, who's a really good, I think he's actually retired now because, of course, it's been 20 years, but he had some success. He had some books that sold really well, and I've read a few of them and really enjoyed them. And yeah, he was a great teacher. There was a couple other people too that I took some classes with. So I guess the next step and kind of in terms of encouragement was through my teachers there, because I still wasn't publishing a lot. It was more just that I was getting really good feedback in those classes, so it kind of made me keep going. And then I also had friends. I'd made a lot of friends that had gotten into writing. So when you have that peer group, you can kind of share your
That's
fiction
huge.
with.
That's
Yeah,
so huge to have a sounding board, any kind of sounding board.
right. Somebody to just tell you you're doing well, or, whatever, just this sense of community, I guess.
Well, that, and it's also really important to have that group, that tight group, close friends who you trust for feedback, because anybody can rip something apart and rip something you wrote to shreds, or if you're reading something at an open mic or whatever. But to give positive, constructive feedback, that's invaluable. So anybody can find that. I think that that's great, because we've all been through the horrors of middle school and high school, where you're standing up in your English class reading something that you wrote, and you're nervous and you're shaking with a piece of paper, and it just takes like one titter, one guffaw, whatever, and it's like, oh, you don't really want to share something again, and it's just really tough. I mean, did you go through like the open mic experience with performing and reading and things like that in front of people,
You know
like
what I
when
think
you were
helped?
younger?
What I think helped with that was that I had already done the music thing.
Right.
So
So you're used to being in front of people.
yeah, I'd been on a stage a ton of times at that point, and it turns out that I don't really have stage fright. It's happened to me a couple times out of nowhere where, I think, oh, I've done this 100 times before. I'll be fine. And then for whatever reason, that particular night, I'm just like a bundle of nerves and I can't really perform. But for the most part, once I get up there, I'm fine and I just kind of go in the moment, and I'm able to sort of almost not think about the crowd of people, to sort of just pretend they don't exist. But yeah, I think that was a product of playing so many shows. It's hard to remember at this point whether I was nervous for the first one or not, but I remember really getting a kind of adrenaline rush out of it, especially if we played well.
Right.
And then you just go around to everybody in the crowd afterwards and you're making a little chit chat or whatever, and you feel like the big important person in the room, right?
Oh yeah, but I mean, like with a band, it's like
Yeah.
everybody's just jazzed to be there. If you're playing at a backyard patio or a bar or something. Like it's like a usually a Friday or Saturday or Sunday, and
Mhm.
everybody's just so excited. They're not at work, they're out with their friends, they're having fun, and you're just the what I want to say, maybe a good analogy is you're the yeah at the end of a great sandwich. Like people are already having a good time. The band comes on stage, and it's a release for them too.
Mhm.
So when you're done on stage and you go out in that crowd, it's like for until the buzz fades. I mean, you're pretty much their hero for the night.
Exactly. There's a kind of immediacy to music that maybe writing doesn't have. I mean, yes, you can do a reading, but let's be honest. I think the biggest reading I've ever done was for like 35 people versus biggest show I've ever played was probably for 500. So, in music, it's just kind of people associate that with seeing it live. That's always been really kind of folded into what music is versus reading is something you do in private alone. And so, yeah, you can go to a poetry or fiction reading, but I just don't think it kind of has the same mass appeal as going to see music does.
I agree. I think that the closest I've come to getting that same reaction that music has, in terms of being on a stage is doing stand up, because
Mhm.
you're telling like a funny story and you get to the end of it and you get the ha ha ha, or a couple of series of one liners or something. And once I started doing poetry and things like that, um, try to incorporate a little bit of, for lack of a better term, shtick,
Yeah.
or even little tiny like Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin physical things. And if you're doing like a 25-minute set as a featured reader or something, just to break the monotony, because we've all been to readings where, someone's talking about their cat or their flower garden, and they've got the monotone voice, and everybody, it's like warm milk and everybody's just bobbing for apples. So and I'm sure it's the same way with you, that over the years you just learn what not to do when you were younger, from seeing
Yeah.
other people to going to shows yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Because when you're doing music, stage banter is, a part of it. And so it kind of taught you, I think, that everything is a performance. And then, like you said, seeing other writers read, I would say most of the best readings I've been to have been kind of almost like a stand up act, where the writer is really witty and they're interacting with the crowd and they're making kind of self deprecating jokes. And it's definitely a stylized thing. It's not just somebody just getting up there and just reading from a piece of paper.
Well, let me ask you this, because I know you do a wide variety of writing, and I've gone through something similar where I think it's really tough to say, get in front of a group of people and read a short story, even if let's just call it flash fiction or something. There's just that certain point, I think, in people's attention span where they just tune out. So have you had some experiences like trying to read or perform longer pieces that have gone really well or not so well? Or maybe there's some kind of advice you could throw out to some of the people watching, if there's some tricks of the trade you might have?
I would say, even if you are going to read from something longer, it might be a good idea to pick a couple excerpts, um, and not try to sit there and read a whole 15-page story.
Right.
I've done that before and it went okay, but I remember being really self conscious halfway through and just feeling like I was droning on, and that there was parts in the story that I thought were kind of funny and they just didn't really land. And I think it's because people are just, not really paying
No, they're just
really close
tune
attention.
out.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if another good point of reference would be to say maybe, when I haven't done, well, no, no one in this area has really kind of been able to do excessive kind of open mic stuff lately, obviously, but when I was doing that stuff, I kind of thought about it, doing a featured thing as almost like a set list as a singer or a band, where I have something really short and punchy to catch someone's attention. Because I kind of feel like once you've got them, you've got them. And it's just your job not to lose them. And
Mhm.
then, kind of have a short, punchy thing at the end with. So you end with them kind of wanting more, and then kind of have more like emotional or kind of more thoughtful pieces toward the middle. But there's really no right or wrong way to do these kind of things. And I think you would agree too that even with what we're doing here right now, things have really changed since the lockdown. I think this has kind of become almost a major way for people to promote their work, their books, their music, their artwork. So were you able to kind of use the time for the last like 18 months or so to kind of work on some projects maybe like 2019 weren't thinking you weren't ever going to have any time for?
Yeah, for sure. I've actually got a couple of music things going on right now. So those have been my main projects. One of them is with a couple musicians that I played with for most of my life. So it was kind of fun to get back together with them. And of course, we were able to do it remotely, just sending files back and forth. So that's something that wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago, when I first started playing, or more like 25 years ago when I first started playing with them. You really had to get together in a room. Um, that would predate, MP3s even, I think. Or at the very least, if they existed, they weren't, widely popular. So you would get together. The only way you would have been able to share music remotely, you would have to record it onto a cassette and then mail it to somebody, or record it onto a CD somehow and mail it to somebody.
Yeah.
And that would have taken forever, right? So in ways, we're really fortunate that if a pandemic had to happen, it happened now, when so much can be done like this. You have Zoom, you have social media, you just have all these ways of exchanging, conversation and information that you wouldn't have had in the past. So yeah, that's probably been the main project I've been working on. And then beyond that, I've been writing when I can, working on a couple longer things. It's been a little tough because dating back to my teenage years, I think I already mentioned, but I started writing in coffee shops, and for whatever reason, that became a habit, where something about going out to a place, being there for a set amount of time, and something about kind of the background noise too.
Oh
Some
yeah,
people
yeah,
find
yeah.
it
The white
distracting.
noise. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like I'm able to tune it out pretty well. But I find if I can go to a place and know, okay, I'm going to be here from 3 to 5, I'll get more done than if I'm at home. I know some people have no problem writing at home, but I've had a little trouble figuring out how to do that again because it's been so long.
I talked to somebody else about this or something similar a few weeks ago, and I think what she was telling me, I'm trying to remember how she phrased it. It's kind of like, obviously we're so thankful things are opening up, and even with a mask, you can kind of go out or be in an outdoor cafe patio and just have your mask off with your cup of coffee and stuff. But I think she phrased it kind of like you've had an adventure for your mind, but your body has to feel like it's going on an adventure too, even if it's just a make believe adventure, and it gets the blood moving. We were talking about the background noise and everything, and I find something similar where it's just that vibe of life. Life is happening, things are going on, even if it's somebody being a jackass and spilling a drink or something, 50 feet away from you. Even if it's just the slight drone of, traffic, but occasionally, you'll hear like a bird or something. Whereas if you're in your apartment and it's just the echoes of your walls. It's just, it can be really stifling. And I've made this joke a few times too about the pandemic is we've all failed our astronaut training. We just suck. There's no way. I would never make it to Mars. So in 6 months in a tin can, I would never ever make it. So yeah, I definitely relate to exactly what you're saying, and I feel like me personally, like I need to go out and do more stuff like that. I just think that we've almost been conditioned in the last 18 months to be like gerbils. Like if we go out, it's, oh well, I want to get fresh fruits and vegetables at the grocery store, or this or that, and um we've become really sedentary you know
Yeah, that kind of brought up another aspect of it that I hadn't really thought about was just the ability to go out and socialize and how important I've found that to be for myself as a writer, as a source of creative inspiration. While I am kind of, not the most social person, I do take some fuel from my experiences. I think everybody does to an
oh
extent. It's
yeah.
just some people are more social than others, but just some little thing that happened to me, a conversation I had, something I saw, right, will stimulate my brain and, it'll help hatch these story ideas or poem ideas or whatever. And it becomes really hard when your life achieves a sort of stasis to find that source of inspiration, I guess.
Here's something that I think that I found over the last the lockdown, and writing short stories and things like that, even with some of the screenplay writing and stuff that I do. um, it's like my mind and my body, I had so few personal interactions last year that I noticed that writing toward the end of the year, I had to go back, and that's like trash it or get rid of it, but just really go through and massively slash and edit and cut, because I was so proud of myself at first, reading some of these rough drafts and going like, all right, good job, me. And then I'm going, wait a minute. This dialogue, even if it's in a script or in a paragraph or something, it's too perfect. It's too, you know, that's not how people talk, because people talk in fragments. They interrupt each other. They politely or over top of each other at the same time. And when you're in lockdown, you're just kind of stuck with yourself, or you're reading and you're not really getting that human interaction of just people are so excited to talk, and they're, especially like around kids, they just interrupt each other all the time. So it's like you got to be careful. You can't be too precious with the way characters speak in a story, because people don't talk like that. That's just something that I ran into last year.
Yeah, and I think our social skills have kind of atrophied a little bit, right? So that's definitely part of it. If your social skills are not what they once were, then kind of trying to recreate that scene of people socializing on the page is naturally going to be hard.
I actually interviewed a lady a couple months ago, and I had told her at a time, oh, you can swear, you can talk about anything, just no hate speech or this or that.
Mhm.
And I went off on a tangent on some rant, and I was just like, oh, and this fucking fuck, and she's like, oh, can you say that again? I'm like, what? And she's like, I've been around like these polite like older women and kids, and it's just I forget how people really talk when you go out in public and people swear and they cuss and things like that. To me it was like, yeah, I guess, but what are we really talking about here? But I totally understand what she's saying, and it kind of relates to what you were saying, that it's just we forget, we become so overly polite that it's like if we were hanging out at a bar with like four people, there would just be f-bombs dropped, and people wouldn't, the pleasantries would just be totally dispensed with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like you said, it's definitely been a kind of hard and confusing time for artists, but in a way, it's paradoxical because in theory we should have more time to make our art, right? If we're out socializing less. But extra time doesn't necessarily mean extra productivity. I've actually found that the times in my life that I've been most productive with my writing or music or whatever, have been times when I've had the most in my life going on.
I would agree with
Like
that.
your free time becomes a little bit more valuable, or you don't take it for granted, versus if I know, okay, I'm going to be in my house all day today and I'm not going to go anywhere. It's really easy to just, I can spend 2 more hours, watching YouTube or whatever, versus when I've had, a 50-hour a week job. It's like, okay, on my day off, I'm going to do this. And I just also have all this creative, pent up creative energy in my head, that I need to get out in those situations. So the paradox, of course, is that more time, but maybe less creative impulse.
I would agree with that 1,000%. I want to say that maybe beginning of 2020, I had a few things that I kind of wanted to try, new ideas and things I wanted to jump into. And then I kind of just found myself halfway through 2020 just finishing up stuff that I had wanted to finish from like 2017 and farther back. Just,
Mhm.
I had like 5 or 6 unfinished short story ideas and I wanted to wrap that up. But then after a certain point, I didn't write any new short stories. I mean, I might have dabbled this year, but not with any kind of like deadline or
Mhm.
goal in mind. And the same thing with poetry. I was like, oh, I've got like 10 ideas that are, festering that I want to wrap up. But then after I kind of crested that batch or whatever, it wasn't like I had some new things. So there were, this year I've kind of started a few things that'll hopefully kick off next year. But it's so weird. I agree, like 1,000%. Like 2019 and before, it was like, oh, if I had like an hour, it was golden, and I would just turn my ringer off on my phone and just sit there at my laptop or with a pen and pad and just write, and just like stuff would come pouring out of me because there were so many things coming at me during the day, during the week, in my life, relationships, job, life in general. But then after, like I said, like middle of 2020, when we're all just sitting around going like, well, I haven't watched the bonus features on this DVD. The fuck. Then it wasn't like that real urgency wasn't there. That's the word I'm looking for. There was no, by the end of 2020, there really was no urgency. It was just more like, I want to go outside. I want to see some trees.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I spent the first maybe 2 months of the pandemic in a sort of state of internet checking anxiety. That's really all I remember about from those months, is just sort of reading news articles, refreshing, science pages and case count pages and things like that.
Oh, it was a scary time. Yeah,
And
super
then
scary.
I eventually kind of relaxed a little bit. Relax is the wrong word, but because I was still ultra cautious at that point. It was really unclear, how easily this could be spread by touch and things like that. So, I was ordering Instacart groceries and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
But eventually I got out of my state of panic, put it
right.
that way. Um,
You weren't in survival mode as
right,
much as later you were in just enduring mode.
right, exactly. In the survival mode period, I was just, I was doing crazy things, like I was exercising compulsively because I couldn't leave the house. So I was just like, you know, I'd go on the internet for 20 minutes and then I'd go do 50 push-ups. Then I'd go on the internet for 20 minutes and I'd do 50
Yeah.
sit-ups, right? And that
It's
was
like a
like,
gerbil. You do your wheel time
right.
and then you go to the bowl and then you go to your thing and then you go to the back to the wheel. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just me and my cat, so she probably thought I was crazy,
Cat's like,
and I
what
was
the
a little
fuck?
crazy. But yeah, so I wasn't really accomplishing. I was seeing all these people online, and of course, who knows how much of it is true because people misrepresent themselves online. But I was seeing all these people online being like, it's so nice to actually have time to work on my project, or yes, this is a bad situation, but I'm going to take this opportunity, to finally finish that novel. And I just wasn't doing any of that. And it wasn't probably until 6 months in that I kind of figured out how to do that. And I think my brain just had to adapt to the new reality. And once it did, I was able to be, you know, relaxed and focused enough to start working on some projects. And because of not being able to go to cafes and not really having figured out a way to write, music just kind of became the thing that got me through the pandemic. And it's only been lately, kind of probably in the last 6 months, that I've really started writing again. I think it's kind of coincided with being able to go out in the world again, like we've been talking about. I'm staying mostly at home, but at least if I want to stop by the cafe with my mask on and grab a coffee, or even if, it's warm enough and sit outside there, I can do that. So just having that kind of stimulus has allowed me to get back into the writing mode for
Yeah,
sure.
I would agree with that as well. That um, I just, how should I phrase this? Like we were just talking about the outside stimuli, but I kind of feel like life was just put on hold for so long that we weren't getting new experiences. We were talking about an adventure for your body as well as your mind, but there were times during lockdown where I would literally just go to a park and make sure no one was around and just walk and just maybe be on my phone and just walk and talk. Just I didn't know what else to do, and I was making like really silly videos of myself being characters or funny voices, or it was just I had to do something to not be inside and not. I mean, I love writing and things like that, but I just had to feel like I was out in the world and living, and like I said, failing my astronaut training. So what do you think, to kind of put a point on that moving forward? Do you I personally feel like 2022 is going to be better than the last 2 years. I think more things will be open. I think people are getting vaccinated or have been vaccinated, and hopefully no crazy transformer name sounding variants come up. But do you have pretty high hopes for next year in terms of like what you're going to be able to do and get out and try some new things?
Yeah, I mean, personally for me, 2021 went really well. And a lot of things got rolling that I didn't necessarily expect. So if that stuff can carry forward into 2022 for my own life, that'd be awesome. For the world at large, it does seem, at least, I'm no epidemiologist or whatever, scientist of any kind, right? But it feels like this particular variant that we're dealing with spreads incredibly easily, but is a lot milder in its effects. And that there's some data coming out of various countries where it's been longer that shows that. So that could, knowledgeable people I talk to, at least, have kind of said this could be our escape variant, right? The thing that transforms this into a sort of seasonal virus that we all just kind of deal with and doesn't have as severe implications for the world at large and how we live our lives. So I think I'm kind of hoping by, next spring or summer even, that we could just see the kind of radical drop off in cases that we saw when everybody was first getting vaccinated. And of
Yeah,
course, everything is spiking again now because of this new variant, and because the vaccine really only is giving you immunity for so long. So we've seen this huge spike again, and I kind of always knew it was going to be bad in the winter.
yeah,
And maybe that'll always be the case to a certain extent. Maybe every winter we'll kind of have to deal with this. But if it's like the way that the flu spikes every winter, then we can live with that, right? I haven't really been pleased with the way the world as a whole, you know, this country in particular, but we're not the only ones. The world as a whole has responded to this, and it doesn't necessarily bode well for future worse disasters. But
Oh God.
which might, knock on wood, if you and I live however much longer, right? 40 years, 30 years, whatever it is, 50 years.
I mean, we're talking about like head on a robot spider or what?
Exactly.
Um,
I,
but
I will be
yeah,
I will be very old in 50 years, so we'll see about that.
yeah.
But
Me too.
I might not want to be alive, but yeah, but
Yeah,
knock on wood, you know, but something else, something major is going to happen, right? In a way, we've been kind of a fortunate generation. Um, I don't know. I'm not necessarily lumping you in with my generation because I know our age is a little bit different. But
I'm in my mid 40s, if that helps.
okay, yeah.
So.
So I'm in my early 40s. So yeah, not that different. But I'm kind of right on the cusp of that Gen X thing where you're probably squarely in it. But yeah, we've been fortunate in the sense that we haven't had that many kind of world shifting events. Like, my mom was born at the tail end of World War II. And then she had Vietnam, she had the civil rights movement, and of course, stuff like major events are always going on in the world. It's just hard to see them when you're in them, right? As
Right.
major
It's always
events.
easier to look back and say, oh, well, while you were off in your own little world chasing butterflies, then this
Mhm.
travesty was happening on the other side of the world. It's like, oh, okay.
And
Um,
maybe that's how people felt when they were living through World War II or World War One, like provided they weren't fighting in it.
yeah. I mean, if you were a kid during that, it was just like, oh, my dad went away for
Mhm.
2 years and then he missed a couple of birthdays and then he came home and he had a
Right.
job at the sawmill or whatever happened back then, and it's much more in your face now because
Mhm.
of the internet and cell phones. Um, I think also people talk about like a rise or escalation in violence and things. Yes, that might be the case, but also everyone's carrying a camera with them now, and they
Mhm.
can upload that immediately to the internet, and it goes immediately to the news outlets. So it's just everything is much more in your face. And I think also what I'm noticing about not just our generation, just everybody who's gone through this pandemic the last 2 years, is just social media burnout is a real thing because let's face it, for 6 months or more last year, we were afraid to not have our phones on or turn on the news the first thing in the morning. We were just a captive audience. We didn't,
Mhm.
it's almost like the president getting shot or something. You were just jilted into like, am I safe? Like, can I walk out the door? Should I even touch a newspaper?
Yeah, and I mean there was a lot going on politically on top of that, right?
Oh
So
God, yeah, it was a mess. Still
yeah,
is to a
and
certain degree.
that was a 24-hour news cycle. And it's funny how we've almost gone from mass hysteria about that to almost ignoring it again, right? And there's a lot that hasn't changed. So if you were concerned then, you should probably still be concerned now. But
It's just the way the society is. Everything is a
yeah,
fever pitch built up to the election, and then the few months after, and of course the
yeah,
insurrection. But then after that,
right. But all this stuff is still going on in the background there, so many of the conditions that kind of were created by that or the conditions that caused that are still underlying. But yeah, so we had the pandemic and that, and it's the darkest time I can remember living through, but it's also accentuated or aggravated by social media, like you're saying. And just being able to have all that information or misinformation also, and just, at your disposal. I would see articles every day that were shared that were grossly exaggerated or misleading or whatever. And, people aren't really fact checking. And I'm guilty of that myself, of course.
Right.
But, because you just share something because it pisses you off and it conforms to your beliefs or whatever. Right. And then you dig a little deeper, or you have some social media acquaintance who comes by and says, well, actually, this and this and this. And then you get mad at them for debunking what you posted, but then you take a second and you're like, yeah, but they might be right there, you know?
They have these facts, whereas I just do
Right.
Mad Libs versions of the news.
Exactly.
One other thing I was going to say in relation to what you're talking about earlier, um, with social media, it's also myself, and I would say even people younger, the short attention spans are shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So what I'm saying, when events or situations occur, people are quick to hashtag something and be obsessed with it for 3 days,
Hmm.
5 days, a week. Um, you know, let's say a year ago, everybody was hashtagging, like vaccinated or
Right.
Black Lives Matter or a volcano killed 500 people or
Right.
civil unrest and possible invasion in the Ukraine or anything you can think of. And then time goes by, people take those things off of their social media and it's on to the next thing, on to the next thing. And I think just culture itself moves that way. It's kind of like people will like this kind of music for 3 to 5 years, and then overnight something happens and it changes, and then it changes again, and it's the way it is. But I will say it was almost scary the last 2 years with social media that some of those situations really caused horrible events, mass shootings, riots, buildings being burned, things like that. But then 4 months later, it's like not even a whisper.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really extreme. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, to think, one example I thought of was the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy. Is that how you say his
I
name?
think so.
But everybody was outraged about him. Well, he still has his job, right? And I don't hear anybody talking about it. Occasionally, Robert Reich might post about it, but nobody seems to be as upset now as they were then. When the reality is, the thing that were upset about still exists, but it's just hard to maintain outrage about a particular subject for that long.
It's exhausting.
I mean, even in your personal life, right?
Right.
Like if you were mad at a friend or a roommate or a romantic partner or whatever, after a day, or you just don't want to do that anymore.
No, I mean, it makes you feel horrible and you feel, I mean, physically horrible and emotionally horrible and feel bad for them. And it's the same thing on so many levels. But when it comes to action being taken, it's a little disturbing with like the whole
Mm,
cancel culture thing, where people are like losing their jobs and there's no um, justice in terms of a legal system thing happening. It's just immediate a vilification of someone and they lose their job. And it's one thing if it's like proven and it's off,
mhm.
like the Harvey Weinstein stuff. Yeah, that guy had to, be taken down. There's no question about that. But I mean, it's a little scary to think what social media can do in terms of, well, what proof do we have about so and so doing something, just the average Joe, and all of a sudden, like the the wolves and the vultures descend, and then that person's life is ruined. I'm not saying like what Weinstein or Kevin Spacey or any of these people did was right, but there are other situations where it's like someone's trying to voice an opinion on social media, and it's just like people are just sitting on the sidelines, just sharpening the knives. And I don't remember it being like that 5 years ago.
I kind of noticed the start of that around when Facebook started getting really big. Um, so I joined Facebook in 2009. I was maybe a year after most of my friends joined it. But after it had been around for a couple of years, I want to say like 2011 or 2012 was when I started noticing that. And what disturbs me is the lack of nuance, right? That's what you're talking about. So Weinstein, Bill Cosby, whatever, these people are criminals, and they have a proven track record of being
Right.
horrible people. But the the idea that somebody would kind of be burned at the stake because of their opinions, which we might not like, that's disturbing to me, because how easily are the tables flipped, right? Like, um, you might feel comfortable with that happening, if it's happening to people on the right and you're on the left. But if the situation is reversed, which it easily could be if things kind of politically go in that direction, uh, then it's almost like you're creating this climate that allows for that to happen.
Right.
I think witch hunts and things like that have always, that's a strong term, but
But it's
have,
apropos. It's apropos though.
they've always been a thing. I think, I don't really, but social media has allowed an avenue for it a little bit more.
A direct line.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas you think about in the past, it just would have been much more complicated
Or
to,
ambiguous, yeah.
yeah, to sort of uh, try to take somebody down on the basis of an incorrect opinion. I can't read it from here, unfortunately, but I have a quote on my guitar case, which is just basically, it's from Noam Chomsky, and it basically says something like, um, if we truly live in a free society, that means allowing people or tolerating people who have opinions you detest, something like
Right.
that. Um, and of course, we don't truly live in a free society, but if that's our goal, um, then that just has to be something you're comfortable with as an adult, and you don't have to like it. And if it starts to lead to something more criminal or actionable, then that's different. But I I remember seeing just the other day that I think his name's Jay Johnston. He's like a comedian slash actor. He was on the Sarah Silverman show. He's been on a bunch of things. But he was actually at the Capitol, participating in the insurrection, right? And so he lost his job with Bob's Burgers, which is like, okay, that's one thing. But you see a comment that's like, well, how didn't his colleagues know? And it's like, well, even if they did know, maybe they did know, but why should they demand that he get fired before he's done anything?
Right.
Like,
They're not going to
at
know
that
who's going to run off and do that in
right
DC.
at that point, he's a Trump supporter, which again, I personally just hate everything Trump stands for, but that doesn't mean that if I have a talented coworker or colleague, that if they have those beliefs, I should demand they get fired.
No. Yeah, it's a
Once,
free country. I mean, I'm not a Trump supporter either, but I have friends that are, and it doesn't make me think less of them. It's just, an unfortunate argument that comes up every once in a while, and you kind of agree to disagree. But you have to remember at the end of the day that you were friends before you probably ever talked about politics. About 90% of what you talk about with your friends is probably not politics. And I also wanted to address what you were talking about earlier about being a witch hunt, that one of the great scenes in Monty Python and the Holy Grail that never gets old is the
Mm.
actual witch hunt scene, because it's so appropriate, especially like, how do you know she's a witch? Well, someone told me she was a witch. Well, how do you know she's a witch? Well, she looks like a witch. That's not a real nose. How do you know she's a witch? Well, she turned me into a newt. She did. Well, I got better. It's just all bullshit just because they want to persecute her. They've already got her up on the scale of justice or
Right,
whatever
right,
they
right,
have her
right.
on. And it's like they've already made up their mind she's guilty. And then when someone with half a brain gets into it, they're like, no, 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 no. Well, if she floats, no, come on. But we've already been going here about an hour. Did you
Yeah.
want to read a poem or two before we wrap it up here? I know we kind of
Yeah, we
got
went
off on a
off on
tangent here.
yeah, we went off on a tangent for sure, but yeah, I could read something. I've got a few things here, so let me see what's sort of what I'm feeling the most, I guess.
Yeah, no worries. And then after that, I'll have you kind of just plug your various websites and everything like that.
Hmm. All right, well, I'll read this one because it seems appropriate to what we've been talking about.
Okay.
Since we've been talking a lot about social media and living in that world versus the real world, whatever that means, right? They're both the real world, of course.
Right.
But um, so yeah, this one is called Love Machine version 2.0. Someday I just know it. The ones who invent things, who understand dark matter and super colliders and how a toaster works, who live in ice labs in Siberia and silos in Duluth, will invent a machine to approximate human love. Why not? We have artificial sweetener and synthetic cotton in the metaverse. Let's add one more simulacrum. And then you'll have someone to take with you to the Civil War reenactment, to sit around the fake log fire, to stare out the picture window at the movie projection of the garden you'll never grow. How will this machine look? Like a beautiful woman or man, or the apex of your desires? And why not, while we're at it, your sister or a little girl? Those things we have not the daring or the resources to take to even admit to wanting. Murder, rape, or the mundane. A laundry and dishes machine, a hand crank woman, one of those old models but shiny titanium, complaint free. Or will it look like nothing we've ever seen? It will be the visual representation of companionship, of not being so deeply and desperately alone. And what would that look like? A room of pink cushions, a hummingbird's ceaseless wings? Or would it be a suit to surround you, to take you in its airy arms, fill you with fluid familiar as blood, only better, circulating as amniotic presence with every note? Whatever it is, it will be irresistible, and some people will call it progress. Call cavemen those of us who still prefer the real thing. And we will have no witty rejoinder, no sly argument except the one inside our own urgent hearts.
Nice. Cool. You can read another one if you want, and then we'll kind of wrap it up if you want, or if you're not feeling it, we can wrap it up here.
Yeah, I can find one more.
I just kind of feel like I didn't kind of give you your due time to kind of read anything here. We're kind of pushing it to the end.
All right. Well, this one also seems oddly appropriate because it's kind of about hypochondria. And I think that's something we've all experienced if we're aware at all of what's going on in the world, right? Your
Yeah.
anxiety starts triggering like, oh, my throat's a little sore this morning.
You're even afraid to breathe.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I'm just making sure I can pronounce the first couple of words here.
Are they all medical terms?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, it occurs to me, have I said this aloud? Which is funny because this one was actually in a journal, the co-review, I believe, back in long time ago. It's hard to remember, but Yeah, so I went through a period of my life where I've gone through multiple periods where I was very medically obsessed, put it that way. Um, so
It
yeah, this one's
happens.
called this one's called Afflicted. Doxycycline, ciprofloxacin, ranitidine. The names remind me of distant stars whose light I will never see, or else just what they are, wishes instead of cures. The doctor sticks a gloved finger up my ass with one quick motion. Not quick enough. It's cold with jelly like the finger of an alien, an inhabitant of ranitidine. No blood in my stool, bilirubin normal, no jaundice, no hypoglycemia, Lyme tater negative, chest x-rays, brain MRIs, EKGs, blood pressure good, temperature 96.8, nothing to worry about. No AIDS, no syphilis, no clap. I drink the contrast dye. It tastes like something I can't remember, something from elementary school. The smell of new blacktop and blood and my bloody face, the laughter of Leah Garriman or any other girl I hoped would love me. I lie still until the machine beeps. Nothing like a tolling bell, so I do not ask for whom. And then I turn on my side. 10 more minutes and I'm done, she says. Around me, the machine whirs and hums like an alien landing pod.
Wow. That's great. Whew. All right. Well, I wanted to give you a few minutes here to go ahead and promote your various music and writing and whatever else you might have online that you'd like the folks to know about.
Yeah, so my music channel, like I've mentioned before, is called The Suffering Channel. That's on SoundCloud. There'll be more music up in the future. There is, I've already mentioned, an album kind of forthcoming with a couple of friends. So look for that in a couple months. I don't want to say much more about that. Beyond that, my novel still exists in the world if you can find it. So that was published in 2015 with my friend Okla Elliott, who unfortunately passed away in 2017. And that's why the sequel has kind of not been forthcoming. We had planned a trilogy, but yeah, so the second one, it is still in the works, but the first one's out there. It's called The Doors You Mark Are Your Own. It was put out by Dark House Press. I believe you can still find copies on Amazon and some other places like that. Apart from that, I'm not sure what I have going on. I guess I should promote. There's not going to be much crossover in audience, but I'm doing a Duke basketball podcast called The Devil's Den. It's through thedevilsden.com/247sports. So we have a nice little platform of Duke fans there.
Nice.
And that's been going really well. So that's been occupying a lot of my time. I'm aware that the basketball and poetry community don't really overlap that much, but just thought I'd
Never
throw it out there.
know. You know,
Maybe
might
get a
as well
couple
plug
listeners.
it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think that about covers it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and not just that, but for the great discourse, the back and forth, and just really chewing into the shared experience of what we've been going through the last 2 years. So, Raul Clement, thank you for being on Make Your Own Fun, and he just told you where you can find all of his stuff. So, with that, I'll say thank you again for being on the show, man, and have a happy New Year. Bye bye.